You had a comment in the back?
Sure, if I can. I have to say the name again.
Yes.
Colleen Coates, 30760 North Lakeview Drive. Because there's people here that probably maybe didn't follow all the things that happened, there's two things that happened that I found kind of remarkable, is that at one point it got sent to the Planning Commission for a recommendation, and they were given option 1, 2, 3, and 4.
Are we talking about water testing alone?
No, the short-term rental.
Okay, can we keep it to water testing though, for just this?
Oh, that's why I was asking you. Well, he was making comments
Right.
on other than, that there are some other things involved here.
Right. I would like to continue the conversation though about how we can, because I do believe with the short-term rentals, there are a lot of things that we need to readdress. I think a lot of us know that, and so I do want to have that conversation. I want to have on a much broader
Okay.
area.
Alrighty.
So I promise you, we will
Okay.
get back to that. I think for the sake of this specific topic, if we can look at removing those, and you had mentioned that if we remove these, right, based on the ordinance, what do we do with the applications? And how long does that take, or can we just issue the license if they get a regular panel?
Yes,
Done
so yes,
underwater.
that goes back to my question. What do you want us to do in between now and February? Obviously, that would be assuming that such an ordinance were to pass. Is how do you want us to treat those applications? You just want us to hold on to them, start issuing them? What we've been seeing is most people have gone ahead and just gotten testing for everything that they can.
Right.
So if they get everything but the mercury, essentially the sulfate and the mercury. So do you want us just to start issuing those permits? I guess the one concern would be, what if that ordinance were to fail in February? So I was kind of looking at guidance of what do you want us to do with these for now? Options are start approving the permits, assuming that they have everything else done. Option B, I could see it as don't issue permits. The issue with that would be then people are in violation of the ordinance, and you could say, well, if they have their permit in, we just hold off on enforcement until, those that have a permit in that's pending, we could just hold off on enforcement against those properties until this issue is resolved. Properties that are renting or doing activities that don't have a permit in, we would still conduct processes against those properties, informing them, hey, you need a permit, here's the permit process, so they can start doing it. That would be, I guess, my option B would just be hold off in administering, but don't enforce as long as they have a application in.
I would agree with that.
How many applications have been issued?
I think as of today, we're at 12 or 13 that have been received. We have not issued any licenses as of today.
So no licenses issued?
No. Again, because the ordinance just went into effect on Sunday, and we were having this meeting today, and we weren't here yesterday. We felt before we started our formal review of those applications, we wanted to get some guidance on this issue.
Do they have their, the water testing done on the other?
So I would say, those that have it, most of them, again, I haven't started reviewing them all. I just know I've been communicated with a number of these property owners. That's what they have gone, and that's what we have recommended so far is, if you're going out and getting, get what you can, pretty much get everything but the sulfate and the mercury, and then we'll have this discussion with council and we'll get back to you on what their decision is.
I mean, whatever's the easiest. I think that if they've done everything else that we've asked them to, and the only two things that they don't have is the testing of, sulfate and mercury, why not issue them the permit? And or if that's not the best way to go, then just not enforce and allow them to rent. I don't want to hold them back from renting. I don't need 12 angry people who have done everything else that.
I would say,
That's
Madam
it.
Mayor, that second option in my recommendation would probably be the best recommendation. The only reason being is, should something happen, should the council have a discussion in February, once a license has been issued, it's very hard to get it back.
In my opinion, this is just mine, I don't think that will happen, but I don't think that that would be a reason not to do it. So that's just my opinion.
I guess my only concern is if we don't enforce, what's the timeline to make a final decision that, yes, we'll start issuing licenses? Then now there'll be no enforcement. So there has to be some time frame.
So the intention would be bringing back an ordinance amendment
Next
at
council
the
meeting.
next
As long as
meeting in
it's
February.
in February, yep.
I guess that's what I would favor at this point. I mean, in part in light of the fact the city hasn't issued any licenses. Again, I just, right, wrong, or otherwise, I'm picking up on the fact that this is, you know, quite a polarizing ordinance. It's got impacts, you know, across the board, depending upon how you see it, and what position you take on it. And I fundamentally feel like with anything like this, more conversation, more time in consultation, to really make sure that we're getting it as right as we can, probably has a lot of value.
I definitely agree, and I do want to revisit that. I just want to make sure that we can at least vote on this specific thing to move forward. Just the water testing alone.
And if we do that, are we giving city staff then the okay to actually issue licenses for the short-term rental applications that they've received and are completed?
I think that all depends on what motion the council chooses
Yes.
to give. Again, kind of, you can either just say issue, or you can go that route. I mentioned that secondary route, which I think I honestly would prefer would be just hold them,
Right.
but don't conduct enforcement.
On the testing of those two.
Yeah.
So we're not issuing the licenses, we'd hold them, and then once we vote next council, we need to remove that, or the change the ordinance,
Then we would have the, you know, everyone would
We
be
would issue
compliant.
them
Those that are fully compliant with the ordinance at that point, we would issue their license.
And that is your preferred way?
That would be my preferred way, was just to not issue any licenses at this time. And again, those that have, that's where my caveat would be, is those that have an application in, they are attempting to be in compliance. We would just kind of hold off on any enforcement against them for not being licensed. If we have I think there are other issues that we can address, like if we get complaints of parties and things like that.
Right.
Those are still issues. We can still address
saying
those
all
issues.
enforcement.
I should say, clarify, when I say non-enforcement, as in we don't conduct enforcement against them for not being licensed. Does that help? Does that clarify?
because of this specific
You know, if there are
reason.
if there are loud noise issues, if there are other issues, we can still go in to address those. That ordinance, the ordinance addresses those apart from whether you're licensed or not. You can't have loud parties and all those other things, you know.
I'd move for staff to bring back an amended ordinance of 115.003, removing the two water requirements, holding current licenses, not issuing, not enforcing on the water issues, but enforcing all other aspects of our current ordinance and licensing. Just like I said, that was a motion.
Except for the fact that they don't have an actual permit yet.
They don't actually have a, yeah.
But I will second that.
Okay,
motion.
motion from Councilman Maroney, Councilwoman Ball for a second. Any other discussion?
Just wondering if Councilmember Maroney would be open to amending the motion to also include city staff, I guess scheduling a public hearing next month for the council to consider a moratorium.
That would
Or do I need to
be-
make another motion?
I was going to
after
say,
this
let
motion?
this motion pass, and then
Okay.
I would encourage you to make that motion.
Yes, yes. All right. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
All opposed?
Aye.
Motion passed.
Madam Mayor, if I may, I would like to introduce a motion on the short-term rentals, directing city staff to schedule a public hearing next month to consider a moratorium on short-term rentals.
That was a motion, right?
That was a motion.
I have a question of staff.
Yes.
Can I second that since I was the only one opposed to the short-term rental ordinance?
Your previous stances on anything does not affect your ability on
I'll
this
second
motion.
that then.
All right, any other discussion?
None for me.
All right, all in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
All opposed?
Aye.
All right, motion passes.
I think that's all we need from you on this one and the council, Madam Mayor.
Okay. All right, so discussion of the County Road 11 trail. Do you have anything on this one?
I do not, Madam Mayor. This is all you.
All right. So I wanted to bring this up mainly because, well, I'm also involved in the Pequot Lake School District safe routes. And one of the issues and one of the things that we're trying to address is the ability for kids to walk to school safely, ride their bikes, all the routes. And one of the things about Breezy Point is there is no walking paths, there's no trails, there's some trails, there's, no sidewalks. And so with Lakeshore, and I have talked to the mayor, well, former mayor, she's now representative, and then the Nisswa, they had actually had their entire trail system paid for to connect to the Paul Bunyan land through grants. And totaling, I think it's 4 to 5 million between the two. And so I had sent over, and I talked to the county a little bit about, there was a study done in 2011 for the 11 corridor that would show how a trail would work to potentially do a trail from the Breezy Point Resort to the Paul Bunyan trail, which would then be in conjunction with the safe route, so we can actually get even more grants if we are included in their proposal of grant funding. So I did want to bring this up right away, as I know grant funding and those things take time. So that is why I kind of wanted to have a discussion tonight with you guys about what you guys think, and any concerns, or kind of open it up. And I will allow for some public comment when we're all done on this topic to kind of get an input from the public on this as well.
I
So
guess,
what's your ask?
The ask is really, do we want to move forward with the investigation surrounding the grant funding? Because it's going to take a lot of city staff time and in other areas to try to, make sure that we apply for the grants. Have you, Mr. Chansky, looked into what that would be from a staff perspective on applying for grants, or, what would be the involvement of staff moving forward on getting involved in this?
It would be quite significant. Just the process, with any grant process, there's the process of just trying to go out there, identify grants, what grants are out there, what are their application windows, what are their application requirements, do they have matching fund requirements? A lot of these have matching fund requirements. What are the submittal items? I will say I have been part of projects like this, in my former capacity as community development director with the city of Brainerd, working with the Brainerd Riverfront Committee, which is a community member committee, but having been staffed by the council to work with them on the development of what they call the Mississippi Landing Trailhead Park, which we did end up getting funding, $2.85 million through the Legislative Citizen Commission of Municipal Resources. It took, that committee, it took them roughly 6 years, and, the city committing between actual dollars and staff time around $250,000 to do that. That was that project. That's not this project. So I can just tell you what my experience has been on what that is. So we absolutely can start looking at what that project is. I just can't tell you today what grants are, what the grants are, and all their requirements. Beyond applying for grants, there's always the grant management item as well, which is always a significant hurdle as well, and doing reporting, tracking expenditures, and all that as well. So it's kind of an all-encompassing, finding the grants, applying for the grants, managing the grants, and that's even apart from constructing the project. So
Is
that's
there
kind
any
of.
way you can get in touch with the city staff for Lakeshore and Nisswa or any other cities in the area that have already gone through the process and succeeded in the process in order for us to kind of streamline our ability to get those? Have you-
I can.
Okay.
I am familiar with that project, and I know same thing with them. They did spend many years, and there's a lot of partnerships that went into the development of the East Gull Lake Trail, or the Gull Lake Trail, I should say. I do know most recently that I know Lakeshore and Nisswa are working on something where the actual construction ended up being more than the grant, and so they have to figure out what they're doing there, which is always a concern of, when you ask for a grant in 1 year and then get it, and construction prices increase and such as well. But yes, I can honestly, that'd be a part of that process. Project would be reaching out to others that have done similar projects and see how they did it. So that'd be part of any research. So
The study that was done in 2011, can the council get that information? I'd like to see what,
Sent it to- or-
So I sent it out to the council on behalf of Mayor Zieren this afternoon.
okay.
So that, again, that was a greater corridor study, but it had an element on a small part on what the trail.
And Tim Bray from the county, he also sits on the board for the safe routes for the school. And he is absolutely behind us in any way that we need him to. He was actually the one that brought up the DNR grant. And so he does have a lot of experience. So like you said, partnerships, right? In order to do anything in a city or in a state or wherever, you have to have partnerships. So looking at how we can create those, how we can, how is that going to affect, our residents and the benefits of it. I mean, that's kind of what the discussion here tonight is, just the start of it. And then it does take years, so we have to start sooner than later if we want to see the benefits in the next 5 years. Any other?
This is something that came up with the comprehensive plan, some sort of a trail connecting, Pequot and Breezy. So it's definitely something that I think the citizens were looking to have at some point. So yeah, I would be interested just to see, I know we hired an assistant city administrator, so obviously, staffing is important and a concern of mine to, balance out the workload if that was something we were going to pursue, but yeah. I think it's a good idea to look into it.
I think as it was stated, I think it's a marathon, not a sprint, so it's going to be something that we, can be doable away each week, each month. Is it something that we want to set aside and say we authorize staff to work 2 hours a week on, or something of that nature? I don't know how much that's going to expense out, but I'm for trail systems. It's just, I don't think it's a top priority at this time, but I think it's something that we can keep on the docket for filling some time if we have it in the work day.
I think a trail, and depending upon, what you're talking about, as far as what your goal is ultimately. For instance, if it is a trail to connect a part of the community to the area where the school is, that's one thing. If it's that, in addition to 3 or 4 other segments that connect to wherever else, that becomes something different. I fully support a trail that would connect, to wherever feasible in the community to the school. I think that makes good sense. When I was out talking to residents during the election season, that's something that I heard from people a fair amount, is we need to do more. We need to provide safer routes for people to get around in the community. I think what's going to be key, at least in my experience with grants, is you have to have a level of research and understanding laid out in terms of your ability to even construct. At the time that you typically pursue a grant, they're going to want to know, where's your plan? So I would fully support staff reaching out to neighboring communities to see how they approached it, what they learned, to talk with the county to see if it's even feasible to use, because I'm assuming that it would probably be county right-of-way largely used to construct it. So yeah, partnerships are going to be pretty important.
Madam Mayor, if I may, kind of what I guess I'm hearing from the council is that you're interested. I think one of my recommendation to you maybe for this first step in this marathon would be to let us, as staff, kind of go back in, discuss, and then kind of, talk with some of our counterparts, the county, maybe staff in other communities, others that we know who've done projects like this, and kind of maybe look at it and create kind of what I would call an action plan to come back to you at a later date and to say, okay, here's how we see this going down. Here are kind of the elements that we know, without diving head on into identifying the specific grants and all this other stuff. Here's are the things we know we're gonna have to get done to get to a point of we're constructing a trail, and bringing that and kind of maybe create that, bring that back to the council and give you again more meat to kind of work with as you're deciding how far down this project you want to go.
Perfect.
I think that's a good way to proceed.
Did you?
You were talking about the trail at Lake Shore, so that's my project.
Oh.
So we'll definitely be consulting with the
Yes, there
city
we go.
engineer on this
See, it was
project as
meant
well.
to- Oh, I love that. Thank you. It's meant to be.
Easement issues that'll come up,
Okay.
even though you're on the county road, because you have to maintain their safety standards. So there's a few things that 2.4 to 5.4.
Mm-hmm.
The content of it, that's what happens when you look back, talking, after you span out 5 years, and, look ahead for the cost.
I think.
That's a DNR grant.
Right. Yeah, and I think too, what I'd like to hear from the public, if like, let's say the project does go over what the grant is it something that the public says, absolutely, I would love for my tax dollars to go towards something like this because I could benefit from it, right? So I think there is that side of it where residents, is it something that, yes, I would love to see this, it's okay, I would be willing to pay for some of this? I think that's another question that we should be asking the residents of Breezy Point.
And we're going to ask anyone who wants to speak to please come up to the
Okay.
microphone.
Jerry Schroden, Breezy Point Timeshare. I was heavily involved with the Lake Wobegon Trail grant, and the initial grant application took less than 2 years to get. Significant amount of local support was needed, and that stuff, all as the rules came, all happened. I know my snowmobile club put over $100,000 in it. So if you have something that's worthy, the local monies are not hard to get. They're gettable. But it depends, in this case, it looks like there's multiple grants. We've got the Paul Bunyan Trail. I think you could piggyback on that. You've got a school. You got 2 towns on either end of that school district. I think it'd be very viable. It's just a question if we get enough money. And you can always turn the grant down after it's received or after you're approved. It isn't that if you apply for a grant, you're stuck.
Right. And I think too, expanding on the Parks and Recs board, right? If we do that and we have more community involvement, then we have more people within our community that have that experience, right? With building a trail, he's got experience with grant funding. He's part of an organization that donated, again, is coming together as a community and figuring out how to do the things that we want to do. So that, I think that is definitely something that we should at least take a step forward and look and see what we can do, and we'll just take it day by day on that one.
So is your thinking then to focus on a trail that would in fact connect to the school area, to Pequot and into Breezy? Is that sort of the corridor that you're thinking about or
Yeah.
wanting the city to focus on initially?
Well, and one of the things with the safe routes, they have a very lengthy application process for what they're doing. And in order for us to be involved even in that part of the grant funding, we would then need to start focusing on like our plan for it. And it could run right in front of the school, right in front of the elementary school. And then, wherever kind of where we look at whatever studies, then it could connect just straight through 11 all the way down if that's viable, but then there's other ways that they've looked at doing. Again, there's going to be ways that we're going to have to look at what is the best. But if you're a high schooler that lives in Breezy and you want to ride your bike to school, you can't ride your bike to school right now. So having a trail like that would at least allow them to do something like that. And so that was kind of where the safe routes thing came in, and being a part of that, and how do we work together on making that a part of the school initiative as well. Because right now, even in Breezy, there's literally nowhere for kids to walk.
Right.
Is there, with the Safe Route Committee, is that just to the school for now? So from County Road 4 to the school, or is it all the way to Pequot?
So right now, it is just within the city of Pequot, just because kids are walking on the side of the roads, and then there's no way for them to cross over Patriot. And so again, they're having the same kind of growing pains that Breezy Point's having, so working with them on it. And so again, it's more of just, I know it's gonna be a marathon and not, not a sprint, but at least if we can start now and really start looking at what partnerships do we need to get, the grant funding, like who do we bring in who's already worked on trails so that we don't make any of the mistakes that have already maybe been made before. So I think just really coming together as a community and figuring out how to provide that for residents and for kids is gonna be a worthwhile thing, a lasting impression on the city. I think that people will use it a lot. I know that I will. So I think out of, yes, we need sewer expansion, and yes, there's all these things that, but this is something that's fun. And I don't think Breezy Point's had something fun in a while. So that would be my suggestion, to just, like you said, to move forward. Let's do some digging, some research, figure out what grants are available, figure out, what next steps are, who do we bring in? Is it something that we can have people within the Parks and Recs Committee working on? Do we put it, we have on here, and reestablishing the EDA, right? Does now that maybe with the EDA, as maybe the EDA and the Parks and Rec, how do we bring more people in to work on projects and get it done faster so that we can have more priorities and get more done in the times that we serve on council?
I definitely think it's something we should pursue.
Do we need a motion for that, or are you just gonna
Ideally-
tell me that you are gonna do
Ideally,
it?
I would appreciate kind of a motion and direction of what you would like. If it is just to create that action plan that I mentioned, kind of what it would look like, or
I'll make a motion that staff start working on an action plan and bring it back to us by May, June, or earlier, if feasible.
I'll second.
Right, so Councilman Maroney, motion, Councilman Jensen, second. Any other discussion? All right, motion carries.
Oh, you got to call for the vote first.
Oh, all in favor, say aye.
Aye.
All opposed? Motion carries. All right, next, the revision of city ordinances. Who would like to start?
This was your
Yeah,
request.
I was just gonna say, I think this one's just been on the list as well for like the last
I know
year,
these
so-
two have had enough to say about this, so I was hoping one of them would
At
jump
what
in on
time?
it.
This is their first meeting. How?
And when they were running for office, they
Oh.
brought this up.
Oh,
We're holding them accountable for the things they said when they were running for council.
gotcha.
Dare you?
No, I think, and it came up at the forum.
It did,
I mean,
yes.
it loud and clear. For all the council meetings, this subject has come up from staff, various council members for years. Former mayor and council member Lillihei, I specifically remember him stating that the ordinances were archaic, and they are. And ordinances can be your biggest barrier to development. I think it's long overdue that ordinances and zoning get redone. It's a long process. I know Administrator Chansky has said it's an expensive process, but I think it's something, it's a foundation of the city and the growth. I mean, we all know we're growing. We need to manage the long-term growth, but we need to update the ordinances to the 21st century and make them current. As they are now, it seems everything is a variance before the Planning Commission. I don't understand that. But a lot of the decisions were also made in the 60s. All those small lots north of 11 were intended for trailers. now they're unbuildable. It's in the heart of the city. I mean, there's a lot that needs to be done and looked at, and I think ordinances should be a priority.
So I'm gathering that you're focused on land use type ordinances, different than just, of course, the general type city ordinances. I mean, what we're talking
I
about
think all
is-
of them, but land use is one that's been bantered about for multiple administrations, multiple councils. You have all these lots that aren't buildable. I mean, is there ways to combine land for tax forfeit, privately owned? I mean, what can be done, to be able to allow homes to be built? The issue has come up multiple times, but it's really never been solved.
I did have a conversation with you about this, and actually, Mr. Chansky has a lot of experience with updating ordinances fully.
So, if I can, Madam Mayor, so really, when it comes to the Code of Ordinances, there's two sections. So as Councilmember Scott referred to, there's your zoning code, which is your land use ordinance, and then there's kind of everything else. When it comes to looking at your ordinances, your Code of Ordinances, I would approach them separately, those two sections. The land use ordinance, that is your zoning code, you're going to have essentially a specialist who would come in and work with the city on that. All your other stuff, that is something you could request the city attorney to look at, looking at, because a lot of that other stuff, it's administrative, it's essentially looking at a codification of that ordinance and saying, having the city attorney go through and say, is this up to state statute? Because a lot of times state statutes change regularly every single year, ordinances don't. And a lot of times there's state statutes that get passed, we don't realize it, and you have conflicts. So a lot of those ordinances, operations of the city, those kind of things, I would say leave to the city attorney. Work with the city attorney, get a quote from him if you wanted to go down that route. I would say at this point, from a staff's perspective, those issues are much minor. I don't see as many issues there. As a statutory city, we're kind of just bound to state statute and how the state says we're supposed to operate. It's that zoning stuff, that true home rule items that I think, from what I've been hearing, is the main concern. Not necessarily organizationally, but that land use things. My comment at this time, kind of recommendation, again, similar to the last one, is I can put together, again, this is something I'm very familiar with, I've done this before, is kind of, again, a plan or a just presentation of what it would take. It's a lot of moving pieces. Again, it can be spendy, it can be very time consuming. To bring back before the council, maybe even bring in a former colleague of mine, who this is what she does for a living, and to come before the council as well and just outline, this is what you would be signing up for, and kind of maybe give the council a little more thorough lesson on what you'd be doing, what that looks like, how much it might cost, what kind of time commitment that is from both just the calendar, also from the council, from the planning commission, from staff, to help you further make a decision if this is an avenue you want to go in the short period or in coming years.
So
No.
what would be the specific motion you need then, just for?
I think for staff to come back with kind of an informational information as to what the process would look like to, and I would say review and revise, I would say specifically the city's land use ordinances.
I'll make that motion.
I'll second.
Right? Motion,
Nope, discussion.
well, I was just going to repeat.
Oh, sorry.
Don't screw me up here. I'm already having trouble with it as it is. Councilwoman Ball made the motion. Councilman Maroney seconded. Any discussion?
Yeah, this is I think the first time that we've actually been able to have an outside source maybe come in and give us a little direction or a little bit more insight. I know past councils, we've wanted to do it, and if we directed staff to review if a issue came up before staff, and they looked at the ordinance and go, ooh, that's not right. They brought it back to either the council or planning and zoning to address at that time. So to just kind of take the whole thing and look at it as a whole ball of wax, it's kind of a fresh view to see what that viewpoint would be.
I agree.
I agree, that'd be very helpful.
All in favor, say aye.
Actually, can I just make a comment too?
Yeah.
I just want to acknowledge that, looking at land use ordinances has a direct tie to that very map on the wall there, the city's overall land use map. And that is, really a result of community input and the community's really idea of land use in the city. And I wonder, in some way within what we're going to undertake or ask staff to do, if that doesn't need to be acknowledged, if really what we're looking at doing is in some way soliciting additional public input and feedback on how reflective is that land use map of what people want to see in this city. Because we can spend all the time we want, looking at ordinances and revising and working out the bugs here and there, but at the end of the day, if where we're at from a land use standpoint and how land is being used in this city doesn't reflect what the community really is preferring, then what are we doing? So I guess I don't know how we want to address it or deal with it, other than I just want to acknowledge that somehow, in some way, as we approach this, the comprehensive plan and the city's comprehensive land use, the official zoning map has to be brought into the fold.
And we can take that into consideration too, once we receive kind of that report of, okay, what is this gonna take? And then from there, we open that up to public input, more than just 3 minutes. And then go from there. All right, so now all in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Okay. Opposed? Motion carries. All right, last one. Same thing, kind of, actually, no, it's not the last one, because you talk about the body worn cameras. We'll quickly go through the EDA. So the Cross Lake has the EDA, Economic Development Association. Actually, most cities, I think, do. And when did it go enacted? Like 2009?
I'm not exactly
Tom
sure.
might know.
I don't.
And so there's been talk about reestablishing that. I know that not only involving, past council members, but also business owners in the area, they would actually be, we could have it, half council, half, public, so it's really how we want to establish it, but it's really just a group that comes together and, really talks about how do we look at the economic development of the city as the city grows, which in turn I think does commingle with some of the other things that we've talked about tonight. I just know that there's been a lot of people that have expressed that they would like to see that come back. So I guess we would be talking about the same way, how do the next step be to look into what it would take to reestablish the EDA?
So that's kind of, again, going back to, I think, a recurring theme here of, Madam Mayor, as I've thought about it more, I think there's also some education of what an EDA is, an Economic Development Authority is. It is not like your park board that the council, this is your council group. EDAs are a statutory entity that once you create, there's a specific way in which EDAs are created. Once the EDA is created, it is an independent entity from the city. It is a taxing entity. It can bond, it can acquire land, it can issue debt, even conduct eminent domain. So I think the next step, in my opinion, as I've thought about this a little more, would be that discussion of first presenting, again, bringing back, and we can do it easily in February, of this is what an EDA statutorily is, and this is what their powers are, and this is what they do, and compare that to what is the council actually looking for. Because an EDA statutorily, maybe that is what you want, or maybe it's something else that you're looking for. Because, again, EDAs have a certain level of powers, and that once you create it, you don't necessarily, you can uncreate it, but it's more cumbersome. Again, once you create an EDA, the EDA essentially gets to rock and roll independently from the city. So,
I think it'd be nice to look at more deep dive. I know I met with the former mayor of Cross Lake, and she currently sits on the EDA, and she's still doing a lot of work within the city of Cross Lake. And so again, just more so looking at other cities, is it benefiting their city to have it? Is it not? I mean, just digging into that, I think would be a good thing to see if it is something that would fit.
I can present that again. I was the staff member for the Brainerd EDA, and I'm familiar obviously with that, how the Brainerd EDA works versus, it's a little different than how Baxter chooses to do theirs versus how Pequot chooses to do theirs. So there's a lot of different ways an EDA can function, and I can just bring that back and give that information to you, and you can decide how you would want an EDA should you reestablish one to work.
Perfect. Any other comments on this one?
What was done in lieu of, once they disbanded the EDA, I see for budgetary purposes, they list Bladek as EDA.
So currently, the city does still maintain its EDA levy at about $35,000. What it does is it essentially takes that money, gives it to Bladek, and then Bladek is available for any time we have some assistance we would like to request from them for economic development, or asking them to maybe reach out to their business. Everyone, they have all their connections. So it's really the giving the funds to Bladek is kind of saying, here's the money, and Bladek says, call us when you need us.
Okay, thank you.
And Madam Mayor, just to confirm, you said 35,000?
3,500, sorry.
3,500.
It's about 3,500.
Okay.
So motion, do a motion to,
I'll make a motion to have staff investigate further on the EDA and bring it back at a later meeting about the pros, cons, what it does, exactly as staff outlined.
I second.
okay. Councilman Maroney, motion, Councilwoman Ball, second. Any discussion? Any further discussion? All right, all in favor, say aye.
Aye.
All opposed? Motion carries. All right, we're going to circle back here to the approval of the body worn camera policy. Council.
Nope.
I believe it was actually C, end of year transfers, if I'm correct.
Oh, sorry, end of year transfer.
So 4C became 7H.
Just a question on that. Did we approve the consent agenda outside of that item we took off?
Yes. I believe Mr. Scott made the motion with amending it to remove.
I have recorded as a vote.
Okay.
I have a vote recorded.
Okay. Just
That was a motion by Councilmember Scott, second by Jensen, voted 5-0. I guess the question was, did that include the actual adoption of the agenda, of the consent agenda minus that item, or was it just to remove that item?
It was just to remove the item.
yeah, that's kind of what I recall.
Can
Then
we
we'll need
just
to circle back and actually have a.
Can we discuss it and then make a motion to
Yeah,
approve
we
it
can
all?
address this, you can address this issue and go back.
And then go back.
And
Okay, let's
adopt
do
the
that.
rest of the consent agenda.
Yeah, let's do that.
Yeah.
Councilman Scott?
I was really just wanting city staff to help bring some further, I guess, clarification to the transfers that are proposed to take place. I guess, short of, additional background and understanding of really what it is that we're taking action on, I just, would appreciate a little further information and some clarification. I'm gathering that this is to do with when we talk about year-end, calendar year-end 22 transfers.
Correct, so I can, Madam Mayor, members of the council. So this is fiscal year 2022, so January 1, 2022, December 31, 2022. This is essentially an accounting process we conduct at the end of each year. Unlike private fund accounting, public fund accounting is a little different in that everything is, we have to conform with GASB, which is our accounting, governmental accounting standards board, and how they say we should do our accounting, and they require us to have what we call fund accounting. So we have the general fund, the cemetery fund, the debt fund, the capital fund, the sewer funds, all of our different funds which is how we put our money. And so every year, we do have a number of transfers in between those funds. For example, you have the very first one, that $2,000 from the, we transfer $2,000 from the cemetery fund to the general fund. The purpose of that is to cover some of the public works department's time that it spends on the cemetery. There's $50,000 every year that we transfer from the general fund under the public works to the capital fund for future public works capital equipment. That's kind of our, capital fund is kind of your savings account in a way for capital equipment and other projects. And that's what these are. A lot of these, at the end of the day, this is a kind of end of year accounting process we have to do. For example, I had a question on the $272,000 going from the general fund to the debt service fund for old debt payments. That is a debt that the city has already paid off. We paid our last piece off of a 2012 general obligation bond earlier this year. We paid that off. This is just the accounting mechanism of accounting that money from the general fund that the county levied, that the council levied to pay that debt off, is being transferred on paper to the debt fund. So we just wait until the end of the year to do those transfers. So that is really what these transfers are, is just making that accounting record that we took these funds that the council had previously budgeted and moved them from the fund that they were designated in to the fund that the council had said that they wanted them to be in at the end of the day, either for, again, saving for future equipment, paying off debt, cemetery fund, reimbursing the general fund for those public works expenditures, things like that.
So is it in fact an administrative function as opposed to actually physical movement of money from the general fund into capital and so forth and so on?
So there are accounting procedures, but mostly it's an administrative function, yes. There's not, at the end of the day, where the city's money physically sits is in one bank account, or multiple accounts actually in ours. We have a couple depositories, but it really is, fund accounting in a way, I always refer to, it's what makes it confusing, is fake. We don't have 200 different accounts that our money is sitting in. It's just the way that GASB says that we want you to account for your money and say how you're spending your money. At the end of the day, there's really only like one physical bank account that our money sits in at Pine River Stank Bank.
Yeah, again, I appreciate the clarification, because if this in fact was, movement of actual dollars from the general fund into some of these other areas, I would want more conversation. I would want additional clarification on that to make sure that this council understands. An example of that is the $331,000 for future road improvements. So if I'm understanding that this isn't an actual physical transfer of dollars from the general fund into the capital, but more of an administrative bookkeeping
Correct.
exercise,
Correct.
I guess my questions are answered.
All right, do we have a motion to approve the consent agenda as it stands initially, right?
I would actually have them first just do it, because this was a motion to remove the specific item, have a motion on this specific item first and then go back to the rest of the consent agenda.
Okay. Motion to approve this specific item.
I'll make a motion to approve the year-end transfers.
A second.
All right, motion from Councilman Maroney, second from Councilwoman Ball. Any further discussion? All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
All opposed? Motion carries. Motion to approve the consent agenda.
Second.
Got a
You got
tie.
it. Go ahead.
All right, we have Councilman Maroney for motion, second, Councilman Jensen. Any discussion? All right, all in favor say aye.
Aye.
All opposed? Motion carries. All right, next on,
Do we need
unless,
to take another break?
I'm going to ask, before we jump into Mr. Sandy, I'm just requesting we take one more 2-minute break to reset the recording, just so the public is aware why we're doing this. Hopefully this will be the last council meeting we have to do this. So
all right, call for
just take a
recess.
quick 2-minute recess, Madam
All right,
Mayor, while
perfect. All right.
Deb can reset the recording.
Perfect, 2-minute recess.